And good morning. This is When Opinions Collide. I'm your host, Janartha Fiala, and joining me today is Mr. Charlie Pomeroy. Chaplain Charlie Pomeroy, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you very much for having me.
Glad to finally have you here live in studio at the Midtown Bar and Grill. We are in our new digs, as we have been for a few weeks, actually a couple months now. The time flies. But I'm glad to finally have you, and had you on one or two Zoom calls.
Yep,
But,
we've done a few Zooms, and those have been great.
Absolutely. You know, Mr. Pomeroy is an excellent thinker, but in addition to that, he's also been a chaplain, volunteer chaplain for about 21 years.
Yep.
That's a lot of time and dedication to the pursuit of any one thing, especially a volunteer effort. What's your thought process behind that?
Well, so when I got into that, I wasn't doing it every week per se. We were doing it once a month. And I had a good friend of mine at our church, Don Hawkins, who has been very integral in terms of ministry for me. And Don had started out going to Harris County Jail. And what's really interesting about that is that when he started out doing that, he wasn't going to visit anybody specific. All he wanted to do was really just encourage a guy's heart. And you can literally do that. You can get signed up in the program and do something like that. And he started out doing that. And one day we had a chaplain that worked for TDC and came to our church. And we went through the service and everything, and he stood up at the end and he had mentioned where he was from and what he was doing, and he said that he was looking for volunteers to come into the unit. Well, Don was all over that, and Don went and he just told me about what was going on. And I thought, you know, this would be a great opportunity for me to get involved and just see what it's like. I didn't really know what to expect. I do know that the first time that I went into the unit, one of the most reverberating sounds that you will hear in your life is the closing of metal doors behind you. And it was really, that impacted me. But I'm going to tell you what else really impacted me. And TDC doesn't like this today. They don't like this at all. But when I went in there, I went to the chapel. We were going for a service. I went to the chapel. We got to the doors, and Brother Henry Pike stood there, and he gave me a hug. That was a freaky feeling, but it put a human touch to the moment, and it was incredible. You know, I continued going for several months after that, once a month.
And Brother Pike was
He was an inmate.
Correct?
Yes.
Just so everyone understands.
Yeah, he was an inmate, and he had a big old smile. He was really glad to see us coming in. And, you know, from there, you really start to you understand what is necessary for ministry in a prison unit. And, you know, when the Bible says, and you visited me in prison, I think about those words. It's big. That's important. There's many a man that is in prison and does not get a letter from family, does not get letters from friends. They are on an island. And so that really, it spoke to me, and the Lord just really continued to speak to my heart about this. It was a few years later, and I started going every week. And I'm talking doing services in the morning, in the evening, doing Bible studies in the afternoon. I am not currently serving up there. There's reasons for that, and I'm not going to get into that. Nothing that anybody has done wrong. But the thing is that the ministry in a prison unit is probably one of the most important ministries that we could have as a part of a local New Testament church. But that's how I got going in it. It was just incredible.
Wow, making a difference in a lot of very, very sad stories.
And there were, and I'm not going to get into those right now. Maybe we can do that on another show or something. But the thing is that every man has a story, and one of the things too that you know, I think is important to note. We've all been placed here on this earth to make an impact. people. And that was my opportunity to impact. I still talk to several of guys that have gotten out since I've been up there. And it's great to see how well they're doing. And they are doing well.
So while you were there, one of the things that you were interested in changing, and something I know that you're really passionate about, is worldview.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so, and that's kind of why I invited you here today, was to talk about worldview. It's just so we're clear on terms. What is a worldview? Who has it, and what does it do to someone's life?
So we could spend hours just on the definition of worldview. What a lot of people don't realize is that everyone has a worldview. They may not think that they do, but they do. But there's also different types of worldviews. So let's just start at a really broad perspective here. When you're talking about a classic definition of worldview, I like to use the one that Dr. Del Tackett uses, who has put together a course on a proper biblical worldview. But the definition would be kind of, it takes some form of the lens through which one sees the world and sees the world around them. That's a really good starting point for a definition of a worldview, but that's not necessarily the specifics of what a worldview is. So we can get into other things. We can talk about a formal worldview versus a personal worldview. So for instance, in a formal worldview, you're talking about things like Christianity, you're talking about things like Islam, atheism, and we could get on into other aspects. Those are formal worldviews. You can also have personal worldviews where you're talking about personal beliefs. I need to lose weight in order to look good. I need to do this to keep my image up. That kind of thing. That's more of a personal worldview. And boy, you could talk about hundreds and thousands of those kind of things. The key for me in really understanding what a worldview is this. It is a system of beliefs that helps me understand how I should act, think, feel.
Okay, so let's unpack that for just a moment.
Mm-hmm.
From what we're defining here, we're really talking about the base code, if you will, in the computer that makes it tick.
Absolutely.
Everything in the psyche, in the soul, the psychology of an individual, the reactions that they have to the external stimulus is ultimately defined mostly in part or maybe completely by their worldview.
Absolutely right. So when and here's where this really takes on quite the dynamic. As an individual, what do I believe to be true? What is my reality? Okay. And for different people, that could be different things. And this is why I believe it's important that we have a proper worldview, a biblical worldview, because I have to have a source of truth. If I do not have truth, I have no point of reference from which to move in my life.
Well, what if it's true for me but not true
And
for you?
And that's where the rub is. That is exactly where the rub is. How do I understand reality? And for me, there is no reality outside of what God has put forth. So truth ultimately comes from Him. That's how I judge things. The ultimate thing to really hone in on is this, and this is where your reality versus my reality, your truth versus my truth, really takes on a rubber meet the road moment. And this is where we're at in society today, really. If your reality causes injury to me, or my reality causes injury to you, somebody's reality is not lined up right. When my rights take over your rights kind of thing, and by the way, let me just say that when it comes to rights, again, we have to look at it from a godly perspective.
Well, what about those who don't believe in God? How are they going to
And that
assess that? I mean, if an atheist, or
Yep.
if I'm a Muslim, if I'm a whatever,
Sure.
how does the Judeo-Christian ethic that you're espousing, that conflicts with those?
Sure.
So that worldview, like you said, it's interfering with their truth, as some would put it.
And I think it's incumbent upon each of us to seek out truth. And I'll answer the question by giving you an example. Nabil Qureshi was a former Muslim, and he had quite a conversation with a person on campus at the University of North Carolina. And they were going back and forth, and this other person was a Christian. So they're dialoguing about, which is right, Christianity or Islam. And Nabil Qureshi got to a point where he was just tired of listening to his friend that he was conversing with on this. He was going to prove once and for all that the Muslim faith was the way to go. Well, as you can imagine, when you're trying to do that, you're going to use facts. And Nabil Qureshi went searching for those facts. And what he found stunned him. And Nabil Qureshi noted that the things that he thought were truth were not really true. So Nabil Qureshi comes to a point where he's got to make a decision. Do I accept this over here that I didn't think was true as truth now and move forward? Or do I reject that and stay in my ways? And that's where we're at within culture today. Many times people are stuck in their worldviews, whatever they might be, and they don't want to give up what they have been believing.
So let's unpack that for a moment. You're talking about Nabil Qureshi, he's a Christian apologist for Ravi Zacharias International before he passed away in 20.
That was 3 years ago, I believe. Yeah, 3-4 years ago.
Don't quote me on the date, but his where you're going with that is that he had one argument with one set of evidence, and he compared that evidence with someone else's worldview, the evidence that they used to build their worldview.
Yes.
So, and the biggest question hinged around did Jesus Christ die? That was his. That was
the pinnacle moment.
That was his deal. And Islam teaches that Christ, there was some sort of chicanery or trick, and that's all well and good, unless you take the method of crucifixion, the method of running a spear through someone's rib, water and blood flows out. Typically a bad sign. There's an edema of water buildup during crucifixion, and so the fact that water and blood came out means that we pierced through the pleural cavity and all that drained out. So the historicity of Jesus Christ's death is actually not in question from any reputable Western scholar.
I would agree with that. I think that what changes the whole thing there is resurrection.
Yes, and that's a conversation maybe for a different day. But I agree with you. I agree with you. The resurrection, whether that really happened or not, changes a lot of things. Whether Jesus died or not necessarily as material as the resurrection. But you're saying that when someone is confronted with indisputable facts, if they do not change their worldview, they have the option. They can either change their worldview or not. And you know what? We're going to get into that a little bit more right after this break. This will be a really interesting conversation. At least for me, I sure hope you guys enjoy it as much as I am. We'll be right back after this word from our sponsors. See you in a moment.
have been out of control since we got hit back in March 2020. Mortality rates keep climbing. Infection rates go up and down and then back up again. How long will this go on? No clear answer. Will a vaccine even be effective as this virus continues to spread and to mutate? No clear answers there either. I'm a trained nutritionist, herbologist, personal trainer, behavior modification and stress sciences expert. I'm also a COVID-19 and pneumonia survivor. I've watched the continuous wall-to-wall news coverage, and while yes, wearing a mask and social distancing are crucial now, you're not being given important tools that you need in order to fortify your first line of defense, your best line of defense, which is your own immune system. What's going on here? There are simple, affordable, and natural ways to help build your immune system to fight any virus or bacteria now, and it starts inside of you. That's why I need to invite you to join me for Beyond the Mask, an intimate talk about vital ways to immediately begin boosting your immune system. Are you worried about the potentials of a second wave? Are you concerned now that your immune system may not be strong enough? Let me show you now the changes that will allow you to optimize it. Let me show you how to maximize your exercise benefits in a 12-minute routine that you'll do every other day to easily increase your metabolism, strengthen your respiratory and immune systems, and give you better circulation throughout your body. Listen, sugar feeds both bacteria and viruses. Let me show you ways to kick that sugar addiction now and to get some weight off. Let me share with you keys to better nutrition that boosts your immune system. We are all under too much stress, and stress weakens your immune system. It single-handedly leaves you vulnerable to all kinds of health issues and infections because stress reduces your immune cell numbers and their ability to function. Let me show you tools that you'll easily integrate into your daily life now to naturally reduce your stress cortisol response. I also want you to know about some nutritional supplements that have been shown to naturally improve your immune system and your overall health. Since January, there have been over 700 studies released worldwide on the relationship between COVID-19 and vitamin D3 deficiency. You need to know why. You want to improve your own immune defenses now, want to take back your control? Sign up today for Beyond the Mask and join me as I give you information and tools to easily get you back on track towards a healthier overall immune system now.
And we're back. Joining me once again is Chaplain Charlie Pomeroy, and we've been talking about worldview. Who has one? What does it do to your body? We were establishing earlier that it's really not the OS for your psyche and your psychology, but it is sort of some of the root code. It's what informs a lot of your decisions. And when faced with evidence to the contrary to your worldview, you either have the option to consider that evidence or reject it out of hand. A lot of people reject evidence out of hand, or just, I don't want to hear it, I don't believe that, it does not comport with my worldview. Why do people do that?
That's a really hard question to answer. There's a number of things that I would bring up as possibilities. Number one, we look at some of those things in our worldview as a security blanket. It's what we depend on. Number two, we hate being wrong. We just flat out hate being wrong and admitting that we screwed it up. And I think today in politics, that's really a sad thing. There's very few politicians that will admit, hey, I screwed this up. But when they do admit it, it's really not so much an admission of guilt as it is to a deflect kind of mentality. So that's another one.
Well, they'll lose their base.
Well, and yes,
Because
so
their
there's
base is
a
fully bought
ramification.
into something. There's a ramification for that.
Yeah. But Nabil Qureshi, when he was getting ready to change his worldview, there was something that was far more impactful and driven there in that. And this happens with a lot of people in the Muslim community if they are considering Christianity, and that is this. Nabil Qureshi was fixing to watch his family walk away from him. Because you don't deny the Muslim faith. You don't do that without understanding there's a price to be paid. And so lo and behold, he had a critical decision to make on that. There are some that have a very hard time accepting that outcome. Nabil Qureshi did. Now, what's really wonderful about that is that there were fractures in the family relationship immediately thereafter, but eventually they did get repaired. And that I'm really glad to hear that. But to the question of why do people reject it, those are some possibilities of why people do reject evidential fact. And again, I want to stress that when we talk about a worldview, we're talking about a system of beliefs that guides how we act, think, and feel. And so we accept those things as truth. The source of truth is the most prominent thing in the whole equation.
So the source of truth, I want to break that down because there are a lot of ways that you can sort of parse that.
Mm-hmm.
What is truth? Is a oft asked,
yes, it is,
not so often answered question. So what is truth, and how do we find it? How do we grapple with that?
Okay, so I love this illustration of this, and again, I believe in a biblical worldview. That's where I stand. So I don't think of truth as a concept. I think of truth as a person, and that is Jesus.
So you're saying that Christ is the metaphysical manifestation of
yes.
truth.
And when you take a look at that and you say, well, how can you prove that? I think one of the most interesting conversations that Jesus had was before Pilate. And Pilate was interrogating him and asking him some very difficult questions. And Jesus wasn't saying much. But when he finally did start talking, he ended with, I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am truth. And Pilate, interesting, asked, what is truth? And he walked away from the very one who was the essence of that.
So if we're talking about truth in today's world where we don't have a metaphysical manifestation of truth walking among us, if we take that as a given here,
Mm-hmm.
for the sake of argument, what is truth in day-to-day life? You hear people talk about my truth,
Yes.
and it's what's true for me.
Yep.
What would be your response to someone who says, well, this is my truth. My truth is X, Y, Z.
Well, from what way did you get to the point to be able to say, this is my truth? How did you form that? How did we get there? Every way of a man is right in his own eyes. So whatever I think, that's truth, and you should believe it. Well, we've got how many billions of people in the world today? Everybody has their version of truth. Everybody's truth can't be right. Two things that are different cannot be the same.
It would be, so let me ask you, would you define my truth as, instead of saying my truth, as my perception of reality?
I think that's probably a way that a lot of people look at it, is that way right there.
Be something that is not absolute, because perceptions can be different.
Yeah.
If you look at a crime scene, if you talk to anyone who's done detective work,
Yep.
or if you've ever dealt with preschoolers, who hit Sally, you'll get 5 stories. You say who caused the accident, you get 5 different answers.
Sure.
Does it mean that 4 of those people are lying?
See, and this is why you've got to start out with truth. Truth is a reference point. How did the mariners sail the seas? How can they still sail the seas today? North Star. Why? Because it's a permanent fixture at a specific place. It's a point of reference. That's what we all need in order to move forward. To watch our school systems go from a position of 2 + 2 = 4, well, it could equal 5 or it could equal 1. How is that true? You can't move forward on that. There's no way to grow knowledge without absolute truth. That's what is absolutely critical, and that's the very thing that much of our culture is trying to tear down. I have my way of believing things, you have your way of believing things, we can all do the same, work together. At some point, God's going to show you that's not going to work.
You're referring to the outgrowth of multiculturalism.
Absolutely.
And ultimately a humanist idea that we can have a non-homogeneous culture. But the question would arise, what happens when you have a Sharia supremacist? And what I mean by that, I have a lot of Muslim family and friends. Okay, love y'all, and have no animus. But one of the things that I haven't noticed from them is they don't think it's okay for a man to behead his wife just because she had a pork chop.
Yep.
Which in some countries that is, I mean, really that is Sharia law. That is acceptable under the literalist interpretation of Sharia law. Is that compatible with a Judeo-Christian ethic, or even an atheistic ethic born out of the Burkean Enlightenment?
Well, and when you talk about a biblical worldview, what would Jesus say? There better be a space for forgiveness, and that's where I think where we really need to examine the facts. We need to examine what's really being said. Many people, let's talk Christians. I think it's incumbent upon Christians to understand what the other belief systems are. Why do they believe what they believe? What is it that drives them there? But on the opposite side of that, I think it's important for other belief systems to understand what Christians really are trying to say. Many times we do. It's funny, we were talking about this between shows with Tony, and the issue of communication is really paramount. Saying something is one thing, understanding what was said, that could be another. When you talk about biblical systems and what Jesus said in a situation like that, what would Jesus say? There's a place for forgiveness. Look at what he did with the woman at the well.
Mm-hmm.
You're right. You don't have ex-husbands. You have this many. Well, how did that whole thing end? Go and sin no more. That he was willing to wipe that away. There was forgiveness there. But it was also an understanding, this is what the truth is, and this is where you should be living.
Well, and so that brings us back to worldview, right? The Christian, Judeo-Christian worldview, the mix of Jerusalem with Athens, the idea of a divine revelation that imbues worth and value to an individual, combined with logic, rhetoric, and the best that man has to offer as far as his faculties. Yes. When you combine the two, what you end up with is a system that allows for forgiveness. It allows for clemency. It allows for a nation like the United States reaching out and actually spending billions of dollars on countries that it has no interest in.
Yeah.
If you want to talk about some of these wars, I agree. Some of these wars were done for oil rights or profit. We can debate that. We can get into that. But all the nations that the United States has helped, not as a government, but as a people,
mm-hmm.
all of the hospitals that have been created, that comes out of a world view.
Yes.
And we'll get more back into that. I'm looking at it right now. It's 8:30. How much more time do we have, Mr. Producer? We got 3 minutes? Okay. So well, let's go ahead and foray into that real quick. That worldview, the idea of forgiveness was actually a sign of weakness. Meekness was weakness pre-Christ. And so and a lot of atheist scholars will attest to this, that Christianity, take the claims, yay or nay, is actually the primary factor that has created things like not-for-profit hospitals.
Yep.
You want to talk about how those things have grown. If you have a beef with hospitals, it's not the Christian worldview, it's the government's involvement in the healthcare system. That's another conversation I'd love to have. Should the government be involved in subsidizing stuff? The answer is no. But the Christian worldview is the one that created everyone sending that out. So why does that worldview have a different effect than, say, one based on like the Burkean tradition? If you follow the Enlightenment, you have John Locke and Edmund Burke, right? And John Locke was ultimately responsible for the birth of the British and the American society cultures that we know. Primarily the American culture, though, is really an outgrowth of John Locke, whereas Edmund Burke, the French Revolution, came of the Burkean root of Enlightenment, and ultimately the Second and Third Reich held their tenets based on that, human-based. So what would be the main difference between the two?
Well, I think the one thing to look at in terms of America and why we get into some of the things that we do, or do some of the things that we do. Let's take an example of Haiti after the earthquakes. That's total devastation, and significant. And there's a lot of debate we could have surrounding should we even send people there. But here's why we do. Because we believe in the intrinsic value of human beings. Now, I know there's going to be people sitting here going, okay, Charlie, we don't believe in the intrinsic value of human beings when we have the death penalty. We could have that debate as well, not one for today. But the issue is this: there is intrinsic value in human life. And when you see the amount of suffering that there is, why do we go and help? Because we want to help alleviate some of that suffering, because there's value in that life.
So let's talk about that value after this break. We'll be back in just a couple of minutes. Don't go away. Where does the value of a human life come from? Let's talk about that in just a couple of minutes. Catch you in the break.
We work our whole lives to support our families. With one accident or illness, it can all be gone in an instant. Now there's a smart, affordable way to protect your family. Go to findhealthbenefits.com and discover low-cost life insurance for as little as $2 per month. Add to that a tax-deferred annuity that can help you protect your assets and grow your money for retirement. Learn more. Go to findhealthbenefits.com or call 877-235-6094. A critical illness can strike without warning and wipe out your life savings. In fact, it's the #1 reason for bankruptcy. Find Health Benefits offers an affordable solution. Get up to $50,000 if you get cancer, stroke, or a heart attack, giving you the peace of mind to focus on getting better while the plan helps you to pay your bills and medical expenses. Learn more. Go to findhealthbenefits.com or call 877-235-6094. 66% of seniors spend more time shopping for cable TV than Medicare plans. Most say because it's just too confusing. Laws change every year. The wrong plan could cost you thousands and prevent you from seeing the doctors you want. Introducing FindHealthBenefits.com. Save time, save money, see specialists without referrals. Go to FindHealthBenefits.com or call 877-235-6094 for this informative brochure.
Society is on the edge. Let's bring them back. Edge Radio, because truth still matters.
All right, and we're back again. This is John Arthur Fiala for When Opinions Collide. Captain Charlie Palmer and I have been talking about worldview and where does the value in life come from? And we kind of threw some names around earlier, John Locke and Edmund Burke. These are some thinkers from the period of the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment, for those who aren't too wonkish, and I apologize if I'm getting into that, but the Enlightenment was that time frame between the 1500s and the 1700s, late Renaissance on, where the idea of chattel slavery, the idea of polygamy, concept that women were less than men, these ideas started to be shown in the light that they are today. We started to realize, wait, these are bad practices, these are bad things. And if you look at the difference between Locke and Burke, John Locke was the father of the American British Enlightenment. By the way, the branch of the Enlightenment that was the first to push for the abolition of the Atlantic slave trade in Britain specifically. However, it trickled its way over. We had to fight a civil war over it. We got it done. It took long enough, but we got it done. With that said, the Edmund Burke side was responsible for the French Revolution, and ultimately a lot of the German thinkers that were involved in the growth of the Second and Third Reich, and not Nazism, came out of that. The thing that Locke had was that man was basically bad, but or was more or less neutral. I'm thinking of Rousseau. It's more or less neutral, but he needed government, a higher power, to institute an authority structure based on absolute truth. Whereas Edmund Burke's theory was, man is basically good. Man needs laws that enable the betterment of the species. More close, although Darwin was before his time, very much in line with Darwinian thought pre-Darwin.
Yep.
But is that same branch of philosophy. And that branch of philosophy generated the horrors of the French Revolution, the horrors of Nazi Germany, and ultimately Russia, China. They really come from the idea that you need the betterment of the species versus you need a hierarchical structure to protect the weak. So let's circle back to that question. Where does the value of human life come from?
Well, that ultimately comes from God. So this is that biblical worldview that God has created us. And I'll say this too, before we go any further with this, I think there's four main questions that a lot of people, most every person will ask themselves in some form or another before they die. And the four questions are this: where did I come from? Where am I going? What is the meaning and purpose of life? And how do I reconcile the issue of good and evil, right and wrong? Okay, those are the four questions. And when you take a belief system and you stack them up against those four questions, there's going to be a hard time arguing that the only one that coherently really answers those is Christianity. That's been my conclusion. So when we talk about the value of human life, let's talk about some of those things that you were talking about. Was there a value for a slave? The value was financial. It wasn't anything else. There's more value to a person than using them to profit off them. That's not right. When we talk about Middle Eastern people, especially women, women in the Middle East are still considered, and I don't want to be derogatory, but this is the way they think of it, dogs. A woman is not a dog. A woman has value. And it's incredible to me when we start looking at let's talk about America for a moment. Some of the policies that are being talked about. When you talk about an older person not receiving medical care because they're older and we don't want to
For society.
Yeah. That's taking away the value of that person.
Well, and that's what they did in Germany. Because,
Yes.
Because if you look at it from the perspective of society, that person who's 70 years old who eats up $2-3 million in funds to maintain their life for an additional 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
That couple $1 million could be easily spent on someone like me who's 26. I'm young. I could use that money. Why are you spending that money on that old geezer?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a sad place that we've come to. Let's talk about abortion. Boy, we could go off on that issue. Is there not some value to an unborn child?
Well, the question is that a human life? And that's an interesting conversation.
Next show.
Yeah, right. That's a long conversation to have.
But it comes back to the same question. It comes back to is there value in that person? Yeah. And that ultimately is the intrinsic value issue. Where does that come from? For me, there's only one place that can come from, and that's God himself.
So let's talk about some other worldviews for a moment, because worldview can be based. Your lens that you view everything can be viewed through the lens of tribe, identity, racial identity, the identity, your church culture, your club culture. If you're part of the Atheist Society of America, if you're a Baptist, or if you're a Mormon, or if you're a Muslim,
absolutely.
That can be your identity and your worldview. Mm-hmm. I distinctly refuse to say that I've had people who come up to me and said, "Are you a Christian?" And I say, "Do you mean someone who goes to church on Sunday, does stuff on Friday and Saturday night, yucks it up, does all these things that are not permissible by the scriptures, and goes and sings in the choir again on Sunday?" No. I refuse to align myself with religiosity.
Yeah.
Right? And that's another world, religiosity. I put on my church clothes. I look nice. I go to church. I do these things. I say these things. I comport and identify with this group. But it has no bearing on your actual course of action or belief system. It is a manipulation.
That's a great term
of words and terms to provide some cover here and some cover there, and that's what that ends up becoming.
And that goes to what I was talking about earlier when I said that there's a formal worldview and a personal worldview. What you're doing there is you're mixing the two, and that's why it's difficult to really nail down the issue of worldview. Yeah, it really is. And that's why I try to just stay on the thing that we know about a worldview. It's a set of beliefs that impacts how we act, think, and feel.
And it changes. Worldview changes to some level.
Yes.
My big issue is with Republicans, Democrats. Their worldview changes with the party line.
Yes.
When that's your worldview, and you have a president, President Trump, who says this, that, or the other, you've changed your worldview in some cases. Now, he's been largely conservative, but there are things that I've watched Republicans who held one belief when Barack Obama did something. Oh my gosh, it was terrible. And by the way, I agree.
Yeah.
Trump will do something, and these Republicans will praise him. Like, wait a minute, no. I said, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
I can't believe my president just did that.
Yeah.
And so you
And he's not the only one. You
all of them
pick them. Yeah,
because,
pick one.
because they're all human. And by the way, they all change. The thing is, don't be defined by your politics. Don't be defined by your church family or by your club, by your affiliation.
Yes.
Be defined by a worldview that is formed and forged on objective truth as you can find it.
I would totally agree. And, you know, when we talk about America, America is great. She is not perfect.
Born with some serious birth defects.
Absolutely. But when you compare America to many of the countries around the world today, is there really any other place that you'd want to live?
There's nowhere that has fostered the flourishing of the human race. There's no nation that has fostered the flourishing of human race more than the United States.
I would totally agree with that.
Has America done things poorly? I've been one of the first people out to say that.
Yep.
And I have, God bless my conservative Republican friends. I'll say stuff and they will take offense. It's like, are you anti-American? By the way, it's another worldview, Americanism.
Yep.
I'm not anti-American. As part of being pro-American, I say, hey, this was a bad move. We did evil here in this one case.
Yep.
But let's talk about more on how to build a rock-type worldview. Because how do you, in this world where everything's changing, everything is in flux, how do you build a rock-type worldview so that what you believe today is true 20 years from now? And let me expand on that. You have a lot of folks who have taken the social contract. It was okay for comedians to mock, say, a homosexual 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Today, it is not. By the way, I'll say, mock Christians, homosexuals. If you are a comedian, your job is to lampoon anything and everything under the sun, right? Yep. That is your job. Have fun. Do it to Christians. Do it to atheists. Do it to everyone. But now, all of a sudden, it is no longer not only inappropriate, it is anathema.
Yeah.
To make fun of certain groups.
Or certain people.
Certain individuals. But that's a worldview shift, or is it? Is it more focused on what society says is okay?
No,
is okay?
It absolutely is a shift. And this is the danger with some of the movements that we see today, is that, you know, it's, I don't want to call it a fad, but that's almost what it turns into, because we don't do the homework to understand the underpinnings of why it got started to begin with.
Agreed.
That's a dangerous thing. You know, when you talk about solidifying or cementing in a really good worldview, there's a couple of questions that you really have to ask yourself. What do you believe about the value of your fellow man? That would be first and foremost. Getting back to those 4 questions that I talked about earlier. Where did I come from? Where am I going to? What is the meaning and purpose of life? And how do I reconcile right and wrong or good and evil? Those are important to really consider. That's going to point you in the direction, all right, of where you're going to go. I'm going to talk about the biblical worldview for the moment in terms of how to cement that. You could probably start with a really good set of instructions back in Exodus. And shall we talk about the 10 Commandments? I advocate that if those things were posted on the walls of our schools, even if we didn't have prayers in school, even if we didn't do any Bible reading in school or anything like that, just having those on the wall would impact the people that are walking around. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not murder. Thou shalt honor thy father and thy mother. You know, those things would, when you're constantly reminded of those things and you visually see them, they impact you. Why do you think that we have advertising the way that we do today?
You're talking about cultural indoctrination.
Well, I'm not going to call it cultural indoctrination. I'm going to call it it's simple truth that people, if you truly believe in the value of your fellow man, that's truth. That is, when I think of indoctrination, I think of, I'm trying to get you to believe something because that's what I want you to believe. When I think about those are underpinnings of how we should treat fellow man. I don't care what worldview you have. Those are just spot on underpinnings. They're the foundation, if you will. When you talk about the Ten Commandments and the value of those, some pertain to God, some pertain to man. And those things are things that really set you on a good foundation to move forward in life. So when I hear the term indoctrination, I would not call that indoctrination. That is just simple, this is how you should treat your fellow man. That's where I'd come from on that.
And so what we're saying here is we're basing this on a higher power.
Absolutely.
Can you get to that without the higher power existing?
I think no, I don't think you can.
Can you believe that if you don't believe in the higher power, though?
So think about it like this. Let's wipe God out of the creation, out of the mindset.
Sure.
Can man function on his own?
Absolutely.
I don't think he can. I think he will end up destroying himself, and I think that is exactly what's happening in America today.
The question is for how long, I suppose.
Yeah, well, we're going at warp speed in the wrong direction.
I agree with that.
And so I advocate that without God, you're not going to come to those kind of conclusions, because today what we're really at, we're on the edge. This is scary. We're on the edge of survival of the fittest. That's where we're at. I personally believe that this election, no matter how it turns out, life is going to get ugly in America because people are so passionate one way or the other. And there is no dialogue. The next step is actions, and I think that's what's going to happen.
So let's talk about those who are not Christians for a moment. How do you cement a worldview? And let me phrase it this way. How do you set up a worldview so that your opinion can change, but your values do not?
Wow, I think that's a really good question. I think one of the first and foremost things when you're trying to cement something like that, you want to make sure that the things that you have in your belief system are rock solid. If it's conjecture, if it's open up to debate, that's not something that you want to cement your worldview on.
You want to base your worldview on that.
Right. You want to stay away from that for the moment. You may get to a point where you do feel strongly and that is right. But if it's open to debate, you want to be careful with that. I think one of the things...
Are you saying seek truth?
Yes, I am. Look, Amy Coney Barrett, in responding to some of the questions, they're trying to pin her on the abortion thing. And, you know, when we're talking about seeking truth, you really have to study. A lot of people in life are just floating through life. They're not worried about whether they're learning something new. I'm an advocate that you should read. You should really try to read and study and make yourself more knowledgeable. Seeking truth is absolutely right. Roe versus Wade, compared to some of the other opinions of previous years, they were talking about super precedent, okay? And she talked about how some opinions that have come through the courts are very strongly accepted.
Mm-hmm.
But if you'll note on the Roe versus Wade issue, it's never been accepted by culture.
Sure.
There's a group of people that have, but there's a strong pushback both ways on this issue. Thus, she said, that's not super precedent.
Sure.
And so when you're talking about seeking truth, can my truth change over time? Your understanding of truth can change. I don't think truth changes at all.
And that's why it's really important to have your values set on a
Yes.
standard. If you don't have a standard that you can put on, I think the best standard is truth.
Yep.
If you have one core belief, one core concrete thing that you can base your worldview on, is truth is paramount. I must seek after the truth.
Yep.
If Christianity is real, and if your pursuit of truth is real, then you'll match up. Same with Islam, atheism, whatever. You'll find it.
Yep.
However, you and I tend to believe we've found the truth there. Mr. Pomeroy, it's been excellent having you on. Where can people find you?
I'll tell you what, I don't do a whole lot of social media. I do a little bit. You can find me on Twitter. I don't have my Twitter handle memorized at the moment. You'll find me on there. I would be glad to chat with you and discuss some of these things. I do respond to people, so if they ping